He stood barely 5 feet 3, yet claimed to have killed over 100 people. That was Donald Henry Gaskins, the most infamous death row inmate in South Carolina's history. Since 1976, the state has carried out 48 executions. Each name on that list is a sentence written in cold blood, and behind them are stories that shook the legal system to its core. Some chose fried chicken and dessert for their final meal. Some chose silence. Some offered apologies. Some quoted the Bible. Some still dared to defy death. In this video, we follow the footsteps of 10 of the most brutal death row inmates ever executed in South Carolina, people who not only ended their lives in the death chamber, but also left behind final words and final meals, casting a chilling reflection of both humanity and evil. Are you ready to step into the darkness? First, Donald Henry Gaskins. In the criminal history of South Carolina, the name Donald Henry Gaskins, also known as Pee-wee, is forever linked to acts of violence that defy reason. Born on March 13, 1933, at Florence County, Gaskins had a small frame, standing just over 5 feet 3 inches tall. That made him a frequent target of bullying, which led to his nickname, Pee-wee. From a young age, Donald Henry Gaskins showed disturbing signs. He often skipped school, joined petty theft gangs, and developed a twisted fascination with harming others. At the age of 13, Gaskins was sent to a reform school for boys after being convicted of assaulting a girl. But instead of rehabilitation, that place only deepened his violent mindset. He was repeatedly raped by other inmates, turning him into someone quiet, cold, and extremely dangerous. He learned to survive not through brute strength, but by being cunning, ruthless, and manipulating others. Soon after release, Gaskins reoffended. He was repeatedly convicted of assault, theft, and rape. But his darkest turn came in the late 1960s, when he began a killing spree across the southern United States. From 1969 to 1975, he traveled from state to state, targeting hitchhikers, prostitutes, and lost youth. According to his autobiography, these killings followed a personal ritual, carried out with a sense of dark, almost sacred purpose. The confirmed death toll was 15, but Gaskins claimed the real number was over 100. He described each case in detail, how he disposed of the bodies, and the twisted sense of euphoria he felt after each kill. However, many of these confessions are believed to be exaggerated, perhaps for attention, or simply to stay in the spotlight. In 1975, a guilt-ridden accomplice named Walter Neely revealed the burial sites. Police uncovered 8 bodies in a remote swamp in Florence County. Gaskins was arrested and sentenced to death in 1976. But due to changes in federal law, the sentence was overturned and converted to life without parole. Most thought his story would end behind bars, but Gaskins wasn't finished. In 1982, while in prison, he built a small bomb by hiding explosives and a battery inside a Bible. He secretly passed it to Rudolph Tyner, a fellow inmate who had murdered the parents of a grocery store owner Gaskins once knew. When Tyner opened the Bible, it exploded, killing him instantly in his cell. The act shocked South Carolina authorities. A life-sentenced inmate under constant supervision, with no access to weapons, had killed with a homemade bomb. Gaskins was sentenced to death again. This time, no law could save him. On September 6, 1991, Donald Henry Gaskins was executed by electric chair in South Carolina. Before his death, he said, "I'll let my lawyer speak for me. I'm ready." Second, Brad Sigmon Greenville, a southern city where spring brings blooms and the streets breathe stillness. There, David and Gladys Lark lived quietly in their one-story brick home, peaceful, whole, until one fateful night on April 27, 2001. Brad Keith, Sigmon, the ex-boyfriend of their daughter, broke into the house. He didn't bring flowers or a letter of apology. He brought a storm of unrestrained rage. In a brief but tragic moment, the Larks lost their lives to someone who once called them family. Sigmon didn't stop there. He kidnapped his ex-girlfriend, drove for miles with a gun, but she escaped. He was on the run for 11 days before being captured. At the time, Sigmon didn't scream, didn't plead. He was silent, uncannily so, at trial. Prosecutors said this was a murder born of romantic rejection, but the result felt like an execution. The jury didn't take long. The sentence, death. More than 2 decades later, on March 7th, 2025, South Carolina carried out the sentence in an unexpected way by firing squad. A white room, 3 marksmen, a vest marking the heart, no crying, no one looked away. Before entering the execution chamber, Brad Sigmon had his last meal. 4 pieces of fried chicken, green beans, mashed potatoes with gravy, biscuits, cheesecake, and a glass of sweet tea. A southern meal warm, familiar, oddly comforting. Compared to where he was going, his final words didn't speak of guilt, nor did they ask for forgiveness. They were a quiet, echoing plea. I want my closing statement to be one of love and a calling to my fellow Christians to help us end the death penalty. 3 gunshots followed. The argument was over. But that plea still lingers in the South Carolina air. Third, Larry Gene Bell, Lexington County, in the early summer of 1985. The South Carolina sun was thick and heavy. Inside a modest home belonging to the Smith family, 17-year-old Sharon Faye Smith left for a short drive to the local post office. Her golden hair shimmered, her light white dress catching the breeze, a peaceful morning for a girl still wrapped in teenage dreams. But just hours later, Sharon's car was found. No driver, no note. 2 days passed. The phone at home rang. A man's voice, not deep, not high, came calmly over the line. He spoke clearly, word by word. As if reading a simple message, he told the family Sharon was gone, and invited them to listen to a will she had recorded herself. In the days that followed, the family received handwritten letters and strange, taunting phone calls. They prayed. They clung to hope. But then, Sharon's body was found abandoned by a rural road. Just days later, the nightmare didn't end there. He struck again. Deborah Helmick, 9 years old, was kidnapped right from her front yard. In plain view of her little brother, she was killed just a few days later. The killer, Larry Gene Bell, was a former electrician and part-time security guard, living alone and nearly invisible in the suburbs of Columbia. When arrested, Bell didn't resist. He even led police to the crime scenes. In court, Bell claimed he was Jesus Christ. He made wild, incoherent statements and insisted on representing himself. One attorney described the case as a parade between delusion and genuine evil. On October 4th, 1996, Larry Gene Bell was executed by electric chair at the Central Correctional Institution. In Columbia, his last meal, a single pizza and a can of Coca-Cola. No final words, no apology, no explanation, only silence. And the memory of 2 young girls frozen forever at the age they never got to outgrow. Fourth, James Earl Reed Adams run a quiet rural community where dirt roads sleep under ancient oak trees, and life revolves around Sunday church and white picket fences. But on the night of May 15th, 1994, everything shattered in a heartbeat. Joseph and Barbara Lafayette, parents of Lori Rigo, were winding down a quiet evening. They were a loving couple, lifelong residents of their small home, but they didn't know someone had just been released from prison, returning with one purpose: destruction. James Earl Reed, Lori's ex-boyfriend, had once been convicted of assaulting her. He was released just weeks earlier and couldn't let go of the past. Witnesses said he wandered near her neighborhood, asking questions about her family, Some even saw him standing still outside the Lafayette's home, staring, wordless, into the night. That evening, there were no screams. No one had time to react. Only gunshots, sharp, fast, and final. By the time police arrived, the killer was gone. No weapon, no blood trail, no fingerprints. But Reed, in what was described as half confession, half manipulation, took officers to the place where he claimed he'd dumped the gun. Though the weapon was never found, his statement sealed his fate. At trial, James Earl Reed refused a lawyer. Despite having an IQ of just 77 and signs of mental decline, he chose to represent himself. He rambled. He offered no defense, no remorse, and behind it all was an emptiness no one could reach. The jury took just 30 minutes to decide death. On June 20th, 2008, at Broad River Prison, James Earl Reed walked into the execution chamber, alone. No final meal, no last words, no family, no minister, no friends. As electricity surged through his body, the room echoed with dry, mechanical current. At 11:27 that night, James Earl Reed was pronounced dead. No struggle, no resistance, only absence, just as he had chosen to leave this world. 5th, Mikal Deen Mahdi. July 2004. A trail of crimes swept through the southeastern United States, from Virginia to Florida, leaving behind blood, fire, and a sense of horror no one could explain. At the center of this storm was Mikal Deen Mahdi, just 21 years old, too young for such destruction, but carrying a past already filled with trauma, rage, and uncontrollable violence. On July 15th, in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, Mahdi shot and killed Christopher Jason Boggs, a convenience store clerk, during a quick, unannounced robbery. 2 days later, he stole a car in Columbia, South Carolina, and hid out at the rural home of James Myers, a retired police officer living alone in Calhoun County. When Myers returned home, Mahdi didn't run. He didn't hide. He shot the man 9 times, then doused the scene in diesel and set it ablaze, a cold, deliberate act that left no room for questions. On July 21st, Mahdi was captured in Florida after an intense manhunt. He was extradited to South Carolina. In 2006, he pleaded guilty to murder and was sentenced to death for the North Carolina killing. He received a life sentence without parole 2 decades later, on April 11th, 2025, at Broad River Correctional Institution. Mikal Deen Mahdi entered the execution chamber. He became the second person that year in South Carolina to choose the firing squad rather than lethal injection. His final meal was elaborate ribeye steak, mushroom risotto, broccoli, collard greens, cheesecake, and sweet tea, a feast fit for celebration, not for death. He spoke no final words. He did not turn back. He didn't look toward the viewing room, where James Myers' family and his own lawyer were watching. When the bullet struck, Mahdi let out a faint cry. His body jerked. He gasped for nearly 80 seconds before being pronounced dead at 6:05 p.m. Attorney David Weiss described his client as once deeply curious, sensitive, and full of potential, but abandoned by the system from a young age. Mahdi had been abused, placed in solitary confinement as a teen, and never truly given a chance to change. 6th, Richard Bernard Moore. Spartanburg, South Carolina. A September morning in 1999, at Nicky's Speedy Mart, a chance encounter forever changed the fate of 2 men. Richard Bernard Moore, 44 years old, walked into the store heavily addicted, unarmed, and in search of painkillers, but within minutes, the situation spiraled. A struggle broke out between Moore and store clerk James Mahoney. Moore was shot in the arm. Mahoney, in a tragic turn, was killed by his own firearm. Moore fled the scene with a small amount of cash. At his trial in 2001, Moore was sentenced to death. His defense argued he acted in panic, with no intent to kill. They also pointed out that the entire jury was white, despite the county being 20% black, a fact that raised serious concerns about fairness. During more than 2 decades on death row, Moore was regarded as a model inmate. He mentored newcomers, kept close ties with his family, and consistently expressed deep remorse. Even the trial judge and several jurors later called for clemency. But Governor Henry McMaster refused on November 1st, 2024. At Broad River Correctional Institution, Richard Moore was executed by lethal injection. He was pronounced dead at 6:24 p.m. His final meal included medium-rare steak, fried catfish and shrimp, a baked potato with cheese, green peas, broccoli with cheese, sweet potato pie, German chocolate cake, and grape juice. His final words were a message of repentance and love. I apologize to the family of Mr. James Mahoney for the pain and sorrow I have caused you, to my children and granddaughter. I love you, and I'm very proud of you. Thank you for the joy you brought into my life. And thank you to all my family and friends, old and new, for your love and support. 7th, Hastings, Arthur Wise Aiken, South Carolina, the morning of September 15th, 1997. Inside the steady hum of the RRE, Phalon plant, where parts for lawnmowers were made. No one expected that an ordinary workday would end in tragedy. Hastings, Arthur Wise, 43 years old, was a longtime employee there. He had been fired weeks earlier for performance issues. Afterward, he grew quiet, almost disappeared from town. But that morning, Wise returned to the plant not to ask for forgiveness, but for revenge, armed with a 9mm handgun. He walked through the departments like someone who knew every step. He moved with intention, not frantic, not lost, and targeted those he believed had a hand in his firing. Within minutes, 4 co-workers were dead. Charles Griffith, 56, head of human resources; David Moore, 30, and Ernest Filyaw, 31, both from the molding department; Cheryl Wood, 27, a quality control inspector. 3 others were injured. When Wise completed his list, he took out a bottle of pesticide, drank it, and waited for death. But death didn't come. He vomited the poison and was arrested at the scene. At his 2001 trial, Wise was charged with 4 counts of murder, 3 counts of attempted assault, 1 count of theft, and 4 counts of weapons possession during a violent crime. He offered no defense. He filed no appeals. He sought no clemency. Before the court, he made it clear, "I'm ready to accept the outcome I chose." On November 4th, 2005, at Broad River Correctional Institution, South Carolina. His sentence was carried out by lethal injection. Wise left no final words. His last meal, lobster, French fries, coleslaw, banana pudding, and a glass of milk. No tears, no family by his side, just a sentence fulfilled and a lingering question. Can work strip a person's dignity so completely that they choose vengeance over life? 8th, Marion Bowman Jr., Dorchester County, South Carolina, February 16, 2001. On a gray winter afternoon, a local tragedy caught the community off guard. A burned-out car was found in a remote, wooded area. Inside the trunk was the body of 21-year-old Candy Martin. Candy was a promising young woman, known for her intelligence and kindness, a life just beginning to unfold, but in a moment, her dream was stolen, a single bullet to the head. After the murder, she was dragged into the woods, placed in the trunk, and the car was set on fire. The prime suspect was quickly identified, Marion Bowman Jr., 20 years old, a former high school acquaintance of Candy's. The motive was said to be a dispute over money. Just days earlier, Bowman had reportedly threatened her, saying, "She'll be dead by sundown if she doesn't pay me." What followed shook the case even further. Bowman bragged to friends about killing Candy, even describing the steps without a hint of remorse. At his 2002 trial, Bowman was sentenced to death for first-degree murder and received an additional 10 years for third-degree arson. He denied all charges, claiming his cousin was the real killer, a defense the jury rejected. Citing physical evidence and witness testimony, over the next 2 decades, Marion Bowman Jr. maintained his innocence. He filed numerous appeals, all denied. From death row, he spoke out about what he called inhumane conditions, years of solitary confinement, lack of social contact, and no access to natural light. On the evening of January 31st, 2025, at Broad River Correctional Institution, his sentence was carried out by lethal injection. Time of death 6:27 remorseless. His final meal was a seafood feast: fried shrimp, fish, oysters, chicken wings, fried chicken, onion rings, banana pudding, German chocolate cake, and pineapple cranberry juice. Before dying, Bowman made a final statement. "I did not kill Candy Martin. I am innocent of the crimes for which I am being executed. I know her family is hurting, and if my death brings them peace, then maybe it will have meaning. We are not what the state says we are. We are kind, caring, loving people. And it's a shame the world couldn't see that." Candy Martin's family did not attend the execution, but in a brief statement afterward, they said, "We are not joyful. We are not celebrating. But after 24 years of waiting, we finally feel justice has been served." 9th, David Mark Hill, North Augusta, South Carolina, September 16, 1996. A light morning rain glazed the windows of the Department of Social Services office, a place where people came seeking help, hope, or just someone to talk to. Nothing seemed unusual that morning. But minutes after 9 o'clock, everything descended into chaos. David Mark Hill, 36 years old, walked into the building with a tense expression. He wasn't there to request aid or submit paperwork. Under his coat was a gun, and inside him, a desperation that had built up for over a year. Hill had once been a husband and father living an ordinary life, but in 1995, a car accident left his daughter permanently disabled. After that, Hill spiraled into deep depression. He lost his job, his marriage collapsed, he attempted suicide multiple times, all unsuccessful. When the state intervened, removing his children and placing them in care, Hill lost faith in the system. He felt betrayed, abandoned, and that morning, he returned not for justice, but for something else, armed. In less than 2 minutes, 3 DSS employees, none of whom knew Hill, none directly involved in his case, were shot and killed. Michael Gregory, 30 Josie Curry, 33 Jimmy Riddle, 52. After the shooting, Hill turned the gun on himself but survived. He was treated and later taken into custody fully conscious. At his 2000 trial, mental health experts confirmed that Hill suffered from severe depression, mood disorders, and a long history of suicidal behavior. Still, the jury sentenced him to death, believing his actions went beyond the bounds of mental illness. In the years that followed, Hill filed no appeals. He wrote letters apologizing to the victims' families and said he accepted death as atonement. On the evening of June 6, 2008, at Broad River Correctional Institution, his sentence was carried out by lethal injection. Time of death 6:17 p.m. His final meal was large meatballs, corn, garlic bread, beef burritos, Mexican pizza, tacos, pastries, ice cream, salad with tomatoes and ranch dressing, and a can of Pepsi. Before closing his eyes, Hill spoke slowly, no excuses, no pleas, just a simple, heavy apology. "I sincerely apologize to the families of Josie Curry, Michael Gregory, and James Riddle. I am deeply sorry for the pain my actions have caused. I hope my choice not to delay this execution shows the sincerity of my apology and helps you find closure. Thank you to those who have forgiven me, and to those who cannot or will not forgive me. I pray that today brings you the peace you deserve. 10th, Freddie Eugene Owens, Greenville, South Carolina, Halloween night, 1997. While the city buzzed with laughter, costumes, and candy, a Speedway convenience store on the roadside became the scene of an unthinkable crime. Freddie Eugene Owens, just 19 at the time, and his friend Stephen Golden had planned to rob the store for quick cash. They brought guns, and in one moment of panic, Irene Graves, 41 years old, the store clerk, was shot in the head for not opening the register fast enough. Blood on the floor. No warning. No chance to live. Owens was arrested shortly after, but it was what happened in jail that sealed his fate. He murdered fellow inmate Christopher Lee in a brutal, haunting manner, an act prosecutors called the defining moment of the case. They described Owens as a storm of violence, beyond rehabilitation. He was sentenced to death. But the story didn't end there. In 2024, Stephen Golden, the original accomplice, made a shocking statement. Owens wasn't at the store that night. Golden claimed he had pulled the trigger and lied to save himself. The revelation stirred public debate. The courts listened. But the ruling stood there wasn't enough evidence to delay the execution. Justice, by law, had to proceed. On the night of September 20th, 2024, at Broad River Correctional Institution, Freddie Eugene Owens entered the lethal injection chamber, marking South Carolina's first execution in 13 years. His final meal reflected the youth he once was. Well-done ribeye steak, 2 cheeseburgers, 6 chicken wings, French fries, apple pie, and 2 cans of strawberry soda. When asked for his final words, Owens turned to his longtime appeals lawyer and said simply goodbye. No tears, no explanations, just a death leaving behind echoes of youth, error, and truths that may never be fully known. They were the ones who brought fear, blood, and sorrow into their communities. 10 people, 10 verdicts, 10 executions carried out in the name of justice. But even now, questions still linger. Is death truly the end? Can justice ever be complete? When pain still remains in every gunshot, every drip of poison, every final, hollow stare, lies the coldest warning of all the cost of losing one's humanity. Not because life was taken, but because when humanity is lost, sometimes there is no way back. South Carolina, death row, where justice and tragedy cross paths. A final message from us. If you believe these stories deserve to be told, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Which death row story stayed with you the most? What do you think of the death penalty justice, or just another kind of ending? Every share, every response helps us shine a light on the darkest corners of the justice system. We'll see you again in the next story.